Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building your own business with the people doing it. I'm your host and fellow business builder, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into some good, honest, small business chat. Hello, business builder out there doing your thing. I see you. And if you are balancing a million things right now while also trying to grow your business and further develop yourself, I feel you. You are in the right place. Today's guest is an entrepreneur through and through, looking to solve problems that matter to her and amplify that solution to the communities she builds. In this episode, we really get into the journey of it all, how you start one thing and it leads to another, which you would have never imagined before you got started. We talk about the value in creating the kinds of conversations you want to have, if it's something that you can't find elsewhere through podcasting or any other medium for that matter. About balancing multiple businesses, mastering the art of letting go to refocus on what needs your attention most, and discovering neurodivergence and the period of learning that follows. We also cover inviting your community in to help you grow something that serves them best and what it's like entering the investment community and working towards raising capital. So much goodness in this episode for you. Thank you for being here and showing up for yourself and for all of the work that you do in your own small business journey. Let's get into the chat. I'm here with Jen Clark, fellow podcaster and host of the brilliant and highly rated Hosting with Heart podcast, the podcast for accommodation hosts and managers in Australia, New Zealand, and beyond, who give a shit about people and the planet as much as they do profit. She's also founder of the Hosting with Heart directory, featuring the properties of socially conscious hosts, and startup ship steerer of Heartful. Again, I'm not finished. She's got more. The soon-to-be launched standalone accommodation marketplace for purpose-driven hosts and guests. A woman who has faced many a pivot, redirect, and rebuild. You're in the right place for those chats. Who fundamentally believes that hosting is a privilege and not a right, and that short-term accommodation and its sector's longevity directly relies on us collectively caring for the planet and for people as much as we do profit. Jen, I can't wait to hear all about your business building story. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I'm delighted to be here and on the other side of the microphone for once, which is very refreshing.
Oh, how good is it? Yeah, I'll have to try and get to a place where you can't sneak in and give me some questions.
No, absolutely no. It's a real pleasure to be here, and congratulations to you too on your podcast, which I listen to very often.
Thank you so much for saying that. I am so grateful for your ears. Every pair of ears I find, I want to just bottle them and give them all a big hug. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Let's get ourselves started with just a really nice, fun one, nice, easy one. I'd love to know, how would your partner, Kirsty, describe you?
Ooh, that's a very contentious question. We've been together for almost 10 years. Actually, it'll be 10 years in August. So no one knows me as well as Kirsty knows me. She knows me inside and out, good and bad, the whole lot. I think she would describe me as being someone who doesn't give up on what they want easily, who just goes for it. I'm probably a bit impulsive, actually a lot impulsive, always coming up with new ideas and wanting to pursue them, whether they're viable business ideas or wildly harebrained ideas as to what we do with our life. Yeah, definitely a bit of a comedian maybe. So behind closed doors, we're always having a bit of a laugh. I find that you just can't take life too seriously. Otherwise, you'll just end up in a corner rocking back and forth in tears, which I have done a few times, believe me. But yeah, look, I think she'd probably also say that I'm, a fairly anxious person sometimes too, to be honest. So I have struggled with that over the years, and I still struggle with it. Every day I like to try and work on that in some way, shape or form, whether it's I'm taking a bit of time out or going for a walk or whatever the case might be. But yeah, look, she's my best friend and she's stuck with me for 10 years. Yeah, she's an amazing person and she probably would describe me as the same.
That is brilliant. And I feel like-minded souls. I think sometimes with the high creativity and the ideas driven and action driven. Anxiety feels like something that comes almost hand in hand with that at some time. So I can completely relax. It's something I work very hard at managing myself, which is management is a very loose term.
Exactly. So, I mean, sometimes it just comes down to taking things even an hour at a time if you have to, because it can get quite overwhelming. But I think as I'm getting older, I'm 45 now, I'm getting better at really knowing myself and being a bit more mindful about when I am feeling anxious and doing something about it that's positive rather than going and opening 3 bottles of wine or that would have been me 10 years ago. But now I'm probably a little bit more sensible in terms of how I tackle that.
I feel that I'm a sober gal these days, and mine is now 3 bottles of pasta sauce.
Yes. So yeah, that's much better for you.
Oh, I don't think anyone's meant to have that quantity of pasta, but
maybe not.
Here we are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
So before Heartful, which is your new venture I'm excited to hear about, but even before hosting with Heart, who were you?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because I was someone who was quite different to, I think, how people know me today. So I actually started out when I left school, I got into an architecture degree, of all things. And my dad's an architect. So I was the child of a nurse and an architect. And I knew when I left school that I was really interested in art and design. I was also quite good at maths. So that came as a sort of a natural choice for me to apply to do architecture. So I started off in that. I got about 6 months into the course and just went, the engineering, the science, the stuff about concrete and bricks and all of this sort of stuff just went way over my head. I loved the creative aspect of that course, but the science just completely confounded me. So I ended up deferring. And then I actually ended up going and studying arts and psychology for 3 years at Melbourne Uni after that. And then I got offered a job. I think it was probably maybe halfway through my second or third year of uni. I got offered a job with a local council in their communications department, working on all their sort of communications materials. So their newsletter, their website, even writing articles for the local paper, going out to photo shoots, all of that sort of stuff. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought, this is where I want to be. And that really set the scene, I guess, for my career from that point onwards, which was mostly in design. I started a business with a former partner of mine in 2004, a publishing business. And we used to produce really high quality coffee table books and all of those sorts of things. And that was a really successful business. So we got to the end of, I think it was 2008, about 5 years into that business, and we ended up being a finalist in the Telstra Business Awards, which was really exciting. But then we got to, I think, about year 5 or 6 of that business, and we both had this itch to do something different. We had really enjoyed that time building that business, but we both, we just wanted to go in different directions. And so I then went off and worked in the corporate sphere for a while, and she went off and pursued a teaching opportunity that she wanted to pursue. And I eventually, though, landed back working for myself as a designer, and I was freelancing. And then I just kept getting more and more offers of work. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start another business. So cue business number 2, which is a business I still run today and which has actually helped me finance Hosting with Heart and Heartful, which I'll talk a bit more about. But I've had that business now for 12 years, and that's just Jen Clark Design. That's my design studio. So my last sort of 12 years has been spent working really hard on that. And that, led me to where I am today.
That sounds very exciting and a very practical setup as well, having one feed the other so you can let things grow. Do you find that a challenge mentally I'm in Jen Clark Design mode, I'm in Hosting with Heart mode?
Massively is the answer to that question. It's a massive challenge. Fortunately, I started Hosting with Heart. So we in 2018, and when I say we, my partner Kirsty and at the time our 1-year-old son Max relocated from inner suburban Melbourne to Woodend in the Macedon Ranges. We just needed more space, basically, because having a young child, we were in quite a hemmed-in property in Melbourne, and we just thought, no, we really need some more space. And funnily enough, over a glass of wine one night, we were talking about, okay, where we're going to move. And I just literally went on to, I think it was Gumtree, actually, of all sites, and I think I put in the search fields, 2 or 3 bedroom house, all of Victoria, search. And when I did that, I think it was one of the first couple of houses that came up was in Woodend. And this photo of the property was just so captivating. I was like, oh my God, that place looks amazing. We have to go and see that. Before then, we had absolutely no desire or even a thought of moving out regionally. We just thought we were going to get a bigger place somewhere closer to the city. But anyway, we came and looked at the house, ended up applying for it, got it, because it was a rental when we first started living here, and the rest, they say, is history. We moved out here and we really haven't looked back. That was nearly 5 years ago. Yeah, to get back to your question though about how do I manage the two. So after we moved to Woodend, I had just turned 40 as well, and I thought I really want to do something differently with my career because I'd been in design for 20-ish years, and I thought I really just had this itch to do something different. And being out here, which is such a beautiful area, it's a wine region, a bit of a foodie region, it's beautiful, it's in the mountains. I thought maybe I could actually manage accommodation. I had, not long after I'd met Kirsty, actually, I had done some Airbnb hosting in my own house in Melbourne, and I'd really enjoyed it. And I thought maybe I could do that again and just manage other people's properties, or there was a need really for accommodation out here. There was a bit of a shortage of it. And so I tried that with one house. I thought, well, I'll try and do it with one property and see how I go. And then that turned into 2, and then that turned into 4, and then by the end of that first year, I was managing 6 properties and had basically set up a second business. But look, when I set that business up, I didn't know a lot about the art and science of hosting or short-term accommodation management. I wanted to learn a lot more about it. I hadn't done any formal qualifications or anything like that. And so that's why I started the podcast, because I thought this is a great way for me to promote my business and also to learn from people who have been there a lot longer than I have about how to do this and how to do it well. And yeah, that was the end of 2019. And little did we know that only 3 months around the corner, COVID was going to come and destroy everything.
Oh, you touch on something there that I love, which is you wanted to learn. So you decided to start having conversations with people. And I mean, I've probably talked about it on this podcast before, but it's something I try to remind myself of. Is I started this podcast because I've always wanted to be financially independent and have my own business, but there's a million things that have gotten in the way of that. Self-confidence, not knowing what I want to do, trying it when I was 21 and fucking it up and getting stuck in corporate cycle for years on end and not knowing who I was at the end of all that. A million reasons. And I just knew I wanted to be in small business, be in business for myself, create things. And it's the whole reason I started this podcast, to have conversations with people who have gone through massive periods of change and growth that come with running, starting, creating, closing, running multiple small businesses, micro, small, medium, whatever. I just wanted to have conversations with people about small business. And I think I'm always really passionate for other podcasters who aren't podcasters yet, that if you want to have a conversation about a certain thing and you're not finding the opportunity exists right now, that is enough of a calling for you to go, let me figure out a way to have the conversations I need to have to keep going. Don't worry about the bullshit that everyone's got a podcast or I don't have anything, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Blah, blah. Just start having the kind of conversations you want to hear and let that open up what happens next for you and let it evolve. So I'm just like vibing with you on that.
No, you're spot on. And it's funny though, I think back to the night where I know we were having dinner and I said to Kirsty, you know what, I actually think I want to start a podcast. And she was just like, oh my God, this is another one of your like crazy impulsive ideas. And I basically said, look, let me have a go and we'll see where we land. And I just loved it. Once I started doing it, I mean, there was some initial apprehension and nerves and it's unexplored territory. But I think once you get the hang of it and you do sort of find that point of confidence and you just get so much out of the conversations as well. Yeah, it's a bit addictive.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's like self-development or self-growth addiction as well. You just can't stop.
It can be. I mean, it can be. Not all episodes are, but it can almost be therapeutic, I think, in some ways. Like I sometimes come away from conversations feeling really energized and like I've just had a therapy session. Yeah, it's been great. And so we're up to, I mean, we're recording this in June 2023. So I started the podcast in November 2019. And so we've just clocked 90 episodes. So we're on the home straight to 100, which is super exciting, and which I keep reminding Kirsty about now. So,
so keep me in the space for a little bit where you're running these properties and then you've got your creation, Rangers Escapes. I want to hear a little bit about that. And I guess, yeah, the business of hosting and what challenged you the most through that.
Yeah, obviously, once I started taking on more properties, we needed to give the business a name. And initially, we called it something that now sounds just so clunky. We called it Clark Will because Kirsty's surname's in as will. So we just put together our surnames and called it Clark Will Short Stays or something like that. And it just, when people kept asking me, oh, what do you do? And I said to them, oh, I actually run a design practice, but I also manage accommodation. And what they would say, what's the name of your business? And I would say Clark Will Short Stays. They were just like, what the, it was just too long and verbose. And anyway, so we came up with the name Rangers Escapes, which was much shorter and sharper. It was a baptism of fire in some ways because it is such hard work being a host. People often underestimate the amount of physical work that's involved because it's essentially a cleaning job that's glorified. You really are going in there and cleaning up after people and making beds, and a place has to look absolutely pristine. It can't just be like your day-to-day cleaning of your house. The properties have to look absolutely impeccable because you're subject to review culture and all those sorts of things. For me, that first kind of 6 months was just really intense. I must have lost a bit of weight. It was a really steep learning curve of kind of figuring out how to schedule things and how to best market the business and how to attract more property owners and all of those sorts of things. So it was really all about the mechanics, I guess, of running the business in those early days.
Yeah, you become that jack of all trades, don't you? You're on the tools and you're figuring out how to open a bank account and bill people and when you haven't been paid and following all of the things. So I get that. And you touched on there 2019 into 2020. So I'm absolutely going to guess the impact that had on your business. How did that feel for you going through the process of seeing your business change so quickly?
Yeah, look, it was pretty devastating, to be honest, because I think we had been in existence for just under 12 months when COVID hit in March 2020. I remember the day I think they were announcing the lockdowns here in Melbourne. I just kept seeing cancellation after cancellation come in. And I think over about 2 days, we lost about $40,000 worth of bookings, which was a lot. And not only did we lose that amount in bookings, but then we were also having to refund other guests and who had already paid, and all sorts of things. So there was cash flow to be managed and challenges around that, and just not knowing what was going to happen in terms of, are guests going to be allowed to come back out, or should we postpone them? Or it was just a big question mark over everything. Fortunately, I had the design practice to fall back on, which wasn't affected at all really by COVID. And I look back on that time now and just think, God, thank God I still had that and hadn't just let that go in the process of setting up this other business. I was very grateful for that. But no, it was a really tough time, very challenging. And yeah, that degree of uncertainty over just the future of the business and how COVID would impact it longer term was, yeah, really stressful.
You touched on something there I find so interesting, and I wish I knew who to cite for this feedback and this statement, but there's something to be said for keeping a few eggs in a few baskets. And I absolutely understand that there will be the listener who's thinking, no, you've got to put everything into the one thing that you're doing in order for it to succeed. Absolutely. In the right circumstance, I couldn't agree more. But I do think there is something to be said for having a few things on the go. If you're somebody who likes to be creatively sparked in different ways and it adds something to your overall composition, I think there's a lot of value there. But also because it is that little bit of layer of self-protection, having something to fall back on. I remember this person who I'm thinking of who cited this to me, just no matter how big your business gets, no matter what you're doing, have something random to fall back on. Like, I'm a yoga teacher. I could go and teach in a yoga studio. And yes, that would be challenging and I wouldn't earn very much unless I'm going hard at it. But it's something to fall back on. If things go to the wind, then there's something that you can always fall back on. So I think it's just an interesting way to approach whatever you're doing, is what else can I do and keep going at the same time?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And look, fortunately, I'd been in the position where by 2020, I'd had my design practice for 8 years. So it was a well-oiled machine by then. And I wasn't having to do any marketing. Clients were generally just coming in. So for that, I was so grateful. But yeah, I mean, we ended up actually sort of hanging in there. We got through 2020 by offering sort of shorter, longer term stays, if that makes sense, to people who might have been needing to come and stay with family, or actually a lot of people who were staying in the properties at that time were people whose marriages were breaking down. COVID put so much stress on everyone. I mean, we had a lot of people actually who were splitting up, stay in the properties. And we also had people who were maybe moving into state and couldn't find housing immediately, so needed somewhere to stay in the interim, that sort of thing. So we just kept things ticking over as best we could throughout that kind of year after March 2020. But then ultimately we got to, I think it was June 2021, and we had actually let go of all but one of those houses by then, because a couple of the owners that we were managing for had decided, yeah, we want to put these houses back on the long-term rental market because of the lockdowns that kept happening here in Victoria. And I think a couple of others actually, some people moved back in themselves, that sort of thing. So we ended up with one left, which was actually the first one we started with. And we just got to the point where I think they announced lockdown number 6, and we were just like, oh, we don't know how long this is going to continue. At this point, it was like throwing cash into a rubbish bin. We just kept throwing as much cash at it as we could to try and keep things open. But ultimately, something sort of had to give. So we decided to shut that last one down and shut up shop, essentially. So that was the end of Rangers Escapes. It was a very short-lived business for about 2 years. Tough decision.
I bet it was. And I bet it was difficult at the time to even think about what it might have been there to teach you at that stage and what it gave to you.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. I remember the end of the year prior, I was at this point where I was thinking, I've got to either go hard or go home with this business. Like, I have to use that sort of overused cliche. But I was thinking I can either really just focus on winding this thing down, or I can really try and ramp it up. And we, at that time, actually invested quite heavily in a brand new website for Rangers. We spent like several $1,000s on it. It was a reasonable investment. And it was so beautiful. Like, this website, I was just so very proud of it. And we were really bleeding money at that time too. It was just like, it was a real stretch to get this website built. And I remember thinking, when we did decide to close 6 months later, God, if I could turn back time and just not do that again, I would. But I can honestly look back on it now and say, look, I tried everything possible to try and sort of save that business, but the universe was against me. There's really not a lot I could have done. I sort of don't lose any sleep at night. I know that I gave it everything I could.
And tell me what happened next after that.
Yes. So obviously through this time, I still had a podcast that was growing and was getting more and more popular and more successful, which was great. But when we decided to close Rangers, I really needed a break. Like, I had just been working the 2 jobs, trying to keep one alive and trying to generate enough cash through the other to keep that alive. And I decided to take just 6 months. I just said, I just need 6 months off. I was still running my design practice, but off hosting with Heart, off Rangers Escapes. I just need 6 months to recalibrate. And I did take that time off. And it got to the start of 2022 last year, and I just had this desire, this sort of burning desire to really get things up and running again. Like, I thought, I'm going to take that time off, and if I still want to go ahead with hosting with Heart, even though I'm not hosting it anymore, which seemed kind of a bit weird, to be honest. Like, I was like, I'm running this hosting podcast, but I'm not actually doing it anymore. If I want to continue on, I will. And I really did, like, even more so than probably previously, which was really interesting. So we picked up the reins of the podcast again in 2022, and off we went.
I love that. I think it's a really interesting thing. I've debated over the years. Actually, there was a period with this podcast that I took on a full-time role. I took on a full-time role for 6 months. And it was even then, I still had the podcast and my small business ventures on the side. And even then, I used to say to my partner all the time, I feel like, not like a failure, but a fake, or I'm not fully in it. Like, I've got a full-time, and I had to take a full-time job because I needed the money more than anything. And I was like, this podcast is called Unemployed and Afraid. And of course, Unemployed and Afraid is just a euphemism for self-employed, completely untethered and shitting yourself. Because that's how we feel running a small business.
Maybe you should have renamed it that, Kim.
Could be my byline. And I was like, you feel like a bit of a fake or something like that. But the thing is, anything like that, I think so many of us feel that way. If you make a business based on what you want or what your identity or what your kind of role is at that time, and that changes slightly, it enables you to pivot and rethink about what's important for you about that aspect. And what's been important for me is learning about how to grow in small business and helping other people do it at the same time. And I can see a lot of that with your business. It's not just for you after you get started. You're like, it's actually for the entire community now who are equally as invested in this. Did that play a role in how you gave it rebirth, relife, and got back into it?
Yeah, look, it definitely did. I think one thing that's really important for me to mention too is that during that 6 months that I had off in 2021, Max, my son, was 4, and he was going to daycare at the time. And I remember we were for a long time, we were quite concerned about his eating. He was very picky when it came to his eating, and also was getting overwhelmed quite easily by noise and things like this. And so we became more and more aware of it. And then throughout that process, we were sort of seeing different health professionals and whatnot. And ultimately, Max ended up being diagnosed as autistic in the September, I think it was, of that year. And it was such a strange moment for our family because it was a family of 3. But having gone through that process of diagnosis with Max, both Kirsty and I sort of looked at each other, and it was almost like we'd identified something in ourselves when we went through that process with him. And so both she and I both booked into to be assessed, to have an autism assessment. And I went through the process first, and it was really grueling. It was 6 weeks of interviews and interviews with family members and all this sort of stuff, and questionnaires and tests and you name it. But ultimately, when I met with the psychologist on the very last day after going through all these tests and sessions and so forth, she sat me down and she said, "Congratulations, you're autistic and you've got ADHD." So it was this sort of really big learning period for me, learning about myself. I mean, I was 43 at the time. I had never, ever entertained the idea that I might be autistic or have ADHD. I mean, I had some challenges in my life, but I never thought of them in that context. And so it was this real revelation, this sort of period of all these revelations about our family. And then Kirsty went and got tested, I think about 3 months later, and she too is autistic. So in this period of time, we learnt that all 3 of us were neurodivergent, as I like to say. It's just an easier word to say than autistic, ADHD, and all sorts of different things. But yeah, it was this intense period of learning for us. And I probably took a lot of that into the podcast, into my attitude towards it going forward from 2022 onwards. I was probably a lot more honest with myself, because one of the things that I'd experienced through hosting was, and one of the things I've been really passionate about, was doing it as sustainably as I could and making sure that I was being really inclusive with the way I was marketing and all of these sorts of things. I mean, after I got through the mechanics and sort of learnt how to do it really well, I wanted to ingrain this sort of ethos into what I was doing. And so in 2022, when I picked up the mic again and started the podcast and had this diagnosis and been through this stuff, I really wanted Hosting with Heart to be about those values and about nurturing a community that also had those values. So it took off in a bit of a different direction. I think a few people in our community were surprised by that, but it's very much continued in the same direction since. And I hope it only gets stronger and stronger in that way.
Neurodivergence really is such a wonderful word. And I think I thank you for sharing it as well. It's really an interesting journey. And I think something that will help others feel more supported in that as well. And going on that journey to be able to find that aspect of yourself, did it feel like you were able to make a bit more sense to yourself in some ways?
Yeah, look, a lot. It made sense of a lot of things. So one of the key, or one characteristic, I guess, that people with ADHD particularly have is this really strong sense of what they call social justice, or social justice sensitivity, I think is the official name for it. And that's something that I've always had, which can be both a fantastic thing and also terrible, because even when there's the tiniest little injustice, like I remember standing in a queue for a cab one night in the city after we'd seen a concert, and it was a really long queue for a cab, and right at the end of the line, this guy just jumped in a cab and just, he just completely cut the line. Like, he got in, and anyway, as soon as I saw him get in the cab, I ran over there, bolted the door open and literally pulled him out. And as I walked back I told him off and said, "You just realise all these other people have been waiting. What are you doing?" And as I walked back to the queue, I got this huge round of applause. And it was amazing. But it's funny because when I look back, I think there are actually quite a lot of incidents like that where I've been really possibly gotten a little bit overstressed about things that other people might not necessarily worry about too much. But so in that regard, it was good to have a reason or a bit more of an understanding as to why I was behaving like that. But yeah, it was illuminating, is the word that I would use. Yeah.
Absolutely. When it comes to the directory, so the Hosting with Heart directory, and I'm interested in, I guess, sort of timelines, because you're speaking about inclusivity and finding a place that I'm sort of getting a sense about it's about belonging and finding a place to belong for a cause and grow things. Did the directory start to come about before or after this, or did it start to grow after this? How was that journey?
No, so the directory came about in August of last year. I launched it in August, but so I picked the podcast up again in February, and I had the idea for the directory in March. I thought, wow, there's so many great people in this, because we've got a Facebook group that's attached to the podcast, and that's growing and growing. And I think at the moment we've got between 1,200 and 1,300 people in that group. And every day I see people in there who are doing amazing things with their sort of hosting practice, whether it's creating a really accessible property that might be easy for people with disabilities or chronic illness to stay in, or if it's a super sustainable property with great sustainable credentials, all manner of things. And I thought there's got to be a way to showcase this. And so naturally I thought maybe I can build some kind of directory of my own that showcases these properties that people have built. And we launched it in August of last year, and we had 30 members when we launched. And what are we now? About 10 months on, and we're about to clock 100 members. But we've got, I think, a very big future ahead of us, because at the moment there's just so much. I get so many inquiries about joining, and we're in that process now of figuring out what does this pricing model need to look like for the directory going forward, and what are the membership criteria. And at the moment, we're just sort of in that process of figuring it all out and what it's going to look like going forward.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I guess it's maybe sometimes not always easy to see when you're in it, but hearing your story, seeing this kind of journey, how it's revealed itself to you, and it's directed and focused your desires and what's really important to you into creating something like this that services so many communities beyond just really beautiful place to stay and very highly Instagrammable. But okay, what's the next layer of that? Like, how do I get a little bit, I'm spending my money, I'm going somewhere. How do I, even as a consumer, make sure I'm going to a place that is inclusive from an accessibility perspective, is considerate to the planet, all of these things. And I can sort of see the threads of, as you've started to have to pull back into yourself and learn more about yourself and your family and think about your place in the world, and then inviting everybody back into that. Yeah, it's a lovely journey to hear. And it's wonderful to hear that you've grown so quickly. If you can just get that number 100 to hold off until your 100th episode, it's like a branding dream.
Oh, yeah, right. Coinciding. Yes. Yes, we could have a big 100 party, or
yeah, exactly,
something along those lines. Yes.
Yeah, it writes itself. So just hold them off a little bit.
Oh, look, I mean, we're getting towards the middle of June now. We'll definitely be there by the end of June, which will be great. But no, it's interesting. I did do a presentation at a conference late last year in regional Vic. And at the conference, I was just talking about hosting with Heart and what we're trying to do with this directory. But one of the things I found out in the process of preparing the presentation for that conference was that around 46% of us in Australia have a disability or a chronic illness, or both, or multiple of both. So that's almost one in two people. And yet, if you look at platforms, even, I mean, hope this isn't problematic to name drop, but Airbnb and Stays and some of the larger scale accommodation platforms, which are all American owned, by the way, there just isn't that emphasis on accessibility or any kind of modification, I suppose, for people who might have different needs. And so I wanted to make sure that with this platform that we were catering specifically to that half of the population that really might need a property that has some different features.
This takes me to inquiring about your journey with Heartful. Can you tell me a little about that evolution? I am really I'm interested in hearing the whole story, but of course, previously in our conversations, you mentioned raising capital, and I just think that is a world that terrifies me.
Oh, it terrifies me too, Kim.
I want to hear about this idea, and I want to hear all about that journey.
Yeah, so thank you. So Heartful is essentially the next stage in Hosting with Heart's evolution. What I've discovered through this Hosting with Heart, or the directory on the Hosting with Heart site, is that there seems to be a bit of confusion out there, because we had this pre-existing podcast called Hosting with Heart about what the directory actually is. So people are like, is it a directory of people who follow your podcast, or is it who's it for? So there's a lot of confusion out there about that. And so I've got an advisory group that I meet with every month and who I speak to almost on a daily basis, who are wonderful, who are all members of the Hosting with Heart site. And one of the things that they suggested to me is, they basically said, look, why don't you pull out the directory? And we're about to launch booking functionality as well. So we'll soon be a total a holistic accommodation marketplace where you can go on and you can book accommodation. Why don't you pull that functionality out of the Hosting with Heart site and launch it on its own separate site so that you can clearly market that to guests who might be looking for a property with specific features? And that just seemed to make total sense to me. But then we were like, okay, what are we going to call it though? And we ummed and ahed about all sorts of names. I can't tell you the number of names that we came up with, but we ultimately landed with the name Heartful, or on the name Heartful, because when I refer to hosts or people who are listed on the Hosting with Heart site, I refer to them as being heartful hosts, because that's in essence what they are. I mean, they sort of ape that philosophy of being sustainable, accessible, or as much as they can, creative, focused on quality, focused on social responsibility, and being involved with their local communities and things like that. So Heartful just seemed like a natural name. It's a sort of a perfect sister brand, if you like, for Hosting with Heart. And so, yeah, we're working on that at the moment as I speak. And we're hoping to launch that in the second half of this year, which is really exciting. And that will be a competitor for the likes of Airbnb and Stays and VRBO and Booking.com and all of those big players that don't really cater to anyone other than able-bodied travellers that are probably not necessarily dealing with any other kind of health conditions, whether it's a disability or a chronic health condition or anything.
That's awesome. I have two questions for you. You mentioned your advisory group. I think this is really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you put that in place and how and where you found those people? How did that happen? Because I want to hear all about it, because it just sounds like having people to bounce ideas around with that is incredible.
It has been, Kim, and they are just the best group of people, and they're all people I'm very proud to call good friends now, because I have confided in them a lot. Essentially, I put a call out to our membership and said, would anyone be interested in forming this advisory group? I already had a few people in mind for it who I knew sort of shared my ethos, but could perhaps bring a different perspective to it, to the running of this website. And long story short, I got 5 people together and said, how about we meet once a month? I'd really like to hear from you as to what you want from the site. Because one of the things that's most important to me, I mean, I can't just operate on a silo. Like, I need to be able to make changes to the site and improve it in a way that's consistent with what they want and what they need as hosts. So it was really important for me to give our members an opportunity to voice those concerns regularly. As if COVID hit us again tomorrow, then we'd probably need to meet and decide, okay, what are we going to do with the site now? How can we pivot so that we can support hosts as best we can, or whatever? We just don't know what's going to happen. I thought it was really vital to have that sort of voice, if you like, from our members and that channel to do that.
That's incredible. And so so I'm really clear. It's a non-financial advisory board. It's a group of people that are invested in this, who want to have the benefit of it for their business and want to play a part in how it grows, and they're giving their time and expertise. That's amazing.
Look, they are. They all come from such interesting, different backgrounds themselves too. Like, we've got some people with really amazing corporate backgrounds. We've got one person who used to work at Apple. We've got an existing person who works at Adobe, and hosting backgrounds and farming. We've got one person who runs a farm and who's received multiple awards for her sustainable ethos and the way she runs that farm. And she's absolutely amazing. I mean, yeah, this group of people have become so vital to the way that I am running Hosting with Heart now, and the way I will run Heartful when that gets off the ground. So if anyone's thinking of doing it, I'm a big sort of proponent of the philosophy, if you don't ask, you don't get. Yeah, just all you need to do is ask. And these people are just so willing to contribute ideas. It's fantastic.
That's very cool. Really great way to do it. I love that. My second question for you is around this capital raising experience for Heartful. Tell me, did you know where to start with this? What were your first few steps? That just feels like a mountain.
It feels like a mountain to me too. No, to be honest, I've never been immersed in the investment community before. Superficially, I've heard, and anecdotally, I've heard that it's quite a male-dominated sort of, like, I'm talking about the venture capital sector rather than sort of equity investing or anything like that. But it's a very male-dominated sort of area, and women can often feel really intimidated by that, I think. And so I'd be lying if I said I haven't gone out there and sought to build relationships with people and not felt intimidated, because I have. But yeah, I've just probably in the last month or two just started the process of actually going out and approaching people that I think might share the same values as us and may see just how much potential Heartful has as a platform going forward. But I think you really do have to back yourself and have the confidence to be able to go out to someone and say, hey, look, I think what I'm building here is really unique and has the capacity to change the quality of a lot of people's lives. Can you help me on that journey financially? Because I'm not independently wealthy, unfortunately. So I wish I was.
Feel that.
Yeah, but I'm not. And so whilst I poured every spare dollar, I was just saying to someone the other day, I think I've bought clothes in 2 years, every spare dollar into hosting with Heart and Heartful and just getting it to where it is now. There's only so long that I can continue to do that for. And ultimately, I want to work for the business full time. That's my dream. And to do that, we're going to need some help. Yeah. But it is a mountain.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. And just like practical questions, did you have to prepare like documentation, or is it just a really solid pitch email to get a meeting? Is it just, I feel every step, like I often dwell on the micro steps before I get started with anything, but I just feel like every step is so fucking terrifying.
Yeah, it is. And it's definitely not for everyone. We are still really at a very early stage in that journey. So I haven't had a lot of experience, like in terms of, I've applied for one accelerator program, and that was a very rigorous application process. But other than that, I haven't had a heap of experience other than just going out and sort of informally connecting with people via LinkedIn or whatever the case might be.
Oh, my favorite place in the world, LinkedIn.
It's your favorite place?
It really is. I just think it's such an untapped.
A lot of people just love it.
Oh, God. It's just, I learn so much. I meet so many incredible people through that platform. Yeah, there's a bunch of chaotic things on there you just got to ignore, just like any social media. But geez, it's good for business owners.
It's great. Look, it's a great tool for business owners. And I think if you can just have the guts to maybe shoot someone who you think might be a good mentor or who might be able to give you some good feedback on something in an email. Or I met someone actually last night who has a very successful startup here in Melbourne. I met her at a Startup Victoria event and just sent her an email earlier today and said, could I buy you a coffee? Could I buy you a glass of wine? And so we can talk about your journey building your business. And she already got back to me and said, yeah, no problem. So I think it's just a matter of it. Yeah. Once again, it's if you don't ask, you don't get. So I think what's the worst that can happen? You'll just be back at where you were before you asked with no love lost. So why not just go for it?
Yes, I love that energy. One of my previous guests, Michelle Akidnoa, who I spent an exorbitant amount of time with and just adore, but she said business breaks you so much through the process, like all the tiny things, the shit that happens, what goes wrong and all the millions of admin things that you get so broken that you just pretty well need to just have no shame. Like you get to that point where you just lose any shame around, all right, who am I emailing? Who am I approaching? How do I do this? How do I walk into a room and make sure I talk to the right person? Like you need to have no shame, and you lose that thing that gets in your way of just going for it eventually just by sheer desperation.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just saying to Kirsty the other day, I think the one thing that I've learned having run several businesses now too is the best way to success, or the best sort of road to success, or the best success mindset, if such a thing exists, is to completely embrace the idea of total and utter failure. Because until you get comfortable with that idea, I really don't think that you can get comfortable succeeding. Because and I've been there. Like I've really been at that rock bottom place where I had no money, and I remember having no job back in my 20s. And it's not going to get worse. It's not going to get worse than that, is it? And I came back from that point. So you just got to really, back yourself and go, you know what? If it totally all falls to shit tomorrow, so be it. And give yourself a red hot crack at everything. Yeah, I really just think that you've got to back yourself 100%. And perhaps it's just my age now. I'm at 45, so you become a lot more accepting of yourself and your own foibles and quirks and so forth. But you probably also know your strengths really well too.
So shoot me 12 months from now. What's the hope for Heartful and for Hosting with Heart?
12 months from now, I hope that Hosting with Heart will continue to exist, but it will exist as its own entity, which is essentially a podcast and a resource for hosts. So that's what it started out as, and that's what it will go back to being. And then Heartful will sit alongside that as a leading accommodation marketplace. So I say to some people, we're striving to be the Patagonia of the short-term accommodation space, if that makes sense. That's a business that I know a lot of people admire them. But that sort of philosophy about putting people and planet first, that's exactly what Heartful is about. And ultimately, I hope that we can get to a place where we're generating enough revenue that we could perhaps even support other community-based projects, whether it's by building housing or by helping reduce the number of homeless older women. Most hosts are women. if there's some way that we can give back, that's what my ultimate aim is. So we may or may not become a social enterprise. I don't know. I need to look into that, but it's definitely not off the cards. But yeah, this time next year, I hope Heartful is just zooming along and going from strength to strength, and that Hosting with Heart is sitting nicely alongside it.
Brilliant. I mean, I bet you when you first picked up that microphone and uploaded that first episode to that pod platform, which is a goddamn nightmare in and of itself, figuring out how to do all that stuff. But I bet when that first episode went out, you didn't think that it would be leading you to so much personal uncovery development, and opening the door to what sounds like a very soul enriching business experience. So the biggest congratulations to you for following a thread and keep pulling on that thread until that jumper falls apart and you're left with something very fantastic going, here it is. Here's my thing that I have to do. Well done to you. I can't wait to continue to watch your journey and how much you're going to grow and just take over the world in that space, which is very exciting.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
My absolute pleasure. While you're on the journey, how can the listener and I support you?
The best way, if anyone knows of anyone who may be interested in investing.
Yes, first one, tick.
In the next, we hope it'll be the next big thing in terms of, and look, I really hope that Heartful can go global. That would be my aim. That's going to take some time, obviously, and a lot of hard work, but that's the aim. I've already had people contact me we've got a big following in America and the UK, and people who've asked whether they can actually list their properties already. But unfortunately, we're not yet set up for that, but we will be down the track. But yeah, if anyone knows of anyone who wants to put their money where their values are, let me know. But otherwise, you can certainly follow our journey. We've got a website that has everything on it about Hosting with Heart at hostingwithheart. It's pretty self-explanatory, .net.au. And we will be launching Heartful in the second half of 2023, all things going well. And that will be at heartful.travel. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We've also got a private Facebook community that's thriving. So if you are a host and you want to do the right thing by other people and the planet and create an inclusive, sustainable property, and you care about things like the housing crisis that's going on at the moment in this country, come and join us in the Facebook group. You just need to search for Hosting with Heart and you will find us.
I'm going to have all of those links in the show notes so that the listener, you can go and click and join and be a part of all of those. And yeah, if you know anybody who is hosting, anybody who could be part of this from an investment perspective, absolutely do. DMs, slide into them, get around all of it. Jen, it has been an absolute pleasure today to spend this time with you, to hear about your journey. And I just cannot wait for the next bit. It's been glorious. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
One quick thing, if you're hearing this, you've listened all the way through. Hopefully that means you really like this podcast, because it's pretty generous to give up 40 odd minutes of your time for it. If that is the case, please leave the show a star rating and a review. It helps me reach so many more people who might also listen all the way through and get some benefit and some support out of it. Not to mention, it puts a real spring in my step to read them. Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the podcast for small business builders with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review. And of course, join the community on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid wherever you're hanging out, and I'll see you there.